This episode is sponsored by Lockheed Martin. At Lockheed Martin, veterans are at the center of everything they do. In fact, 1 in 5 of their employees has served in uniform. Lockheed Martin is proud to help men and women like you successfully transition into civilian careers. Join Lockheed Martin and you will find opportunities to take on the same kind of long-term, challenging assignments you tackled while in the military. Whether you're on active duty, transitioning, or already embarking on your civilian career, Lockheed Martin's Military Connect is your online community for professional support. You can find out more at lockheedmartin.bravenew.com. That's lockheedmartin.bravenew.com. Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and my goal is to help military veterans thrive in their civilian career. Today's episode number 212 with Michael Haynie.
All of a sudden, I landed at an assignment, and I'm talking about my time teaching at the Air Force Academy, where I truly fell in love with what I was doing. I was excited to come to work every day. I loved being around the cadets, the students, and you know, the responsibility and the opportunity associated with education. I just found very empowering and inspiring. And when my tour at the Air Force Academy was coming to an end, my next assignment was going to be running an acquisition program in Crystal City, Virginia, and I just could not bring myself to reconcile the idea of, and I don't know a different way to say it, but sort of hanging around for 6 more years to get to 20 and a retirement when I knew I had found something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Well, my guest today, Dr. Mike Haynie, is the founder of Syracuse University's Institute for Veterans and Military Families, or IVMF. He is amongst the top thought leaders about military transition in the country. In this interview, we talk about how IVMF is solving transition problems and opening transition pathways for veterans and their families. We talk about business ownership, credentialing, and licensing programs, all provided for free by IVMF. And they do this thing that's really cool, which is literally giving you the data about which programs are the most lucrative and most transferable in the job market, and then they give it to you for free. We talk about entrepreneurship and about how fear is the biggest obstacle one faces on this path. We talk about how the military trains people to be planners and how that can be a major obstacle to your success in your civilian career. And we talk about the cure, small, actionable steps. Thanks as always for those of you who are listening. If you're enjoying the show, a positive review on iTunes would be greatly appreciated. And with that, let's dive in to my conversation with Dr. Michael Haynie. Well, joining me today in Syracuse, New York, is Dr. Mike Haynie. Mike, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
I'm thrilled to be here.
I wanted to give listeners an abbreviated background for you, Mike. So for listeners, Mike is the Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and Innovation at Syracuse University. He is also the founding executive director of Syracuse University's Institute for Veterans and Military Families, or IVMF. The IVMF is the nation's first interdisciplinary academic institute that's focused purposefully on informing and impacting the policy, economic, wellness, and social concerns of the nation's veterans and their families. Today, the IVMF's educational programs directly impact more than 35,000 veterans and family members annually, and the IVMF is widely acknowledged as the nation's hub of academic thought leadership related to the post-service concerns of America's veterans and military-connected families. Michael started out as an officer in the Air Force, where he served for 14 years. Mike also serves as an appointed member of the U.S. Secretary of Labor's Advisory Committee on Veterans Employment, Training, and Employer Outreach, and as a member of the Advisory Committee for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's Veteran Coming Home Project. And to say the least, that is extremely abbreviated because Mike has been up to a lot since his military service. But Mike, maybe to start off, could you walk through what led you to found the IVMF?
Sure. And I wish I could, if I could sit here today and say it was all part of a very strategic plan. I I wouldn't be very authentic with you if I made that claim. Truth be told, I got out of the military in 2006. I was fortunate that during my service, I had the opportunity to go to school as a military assignment and get a Ph.D. and then go teach at the Air Force Academy. And I got out of the Air Force because I fell in love with teaching. I fell in love with higher education, came to Syracuse, and quite honestly, I think I missed an awful lot of what I had while I was serving. I missed the sense of community and being part of something bigger than myself. And I think that's what motivated me ultimately to first at Syracuse start a small program in our business school focused on opening the door to business ownership for post 9/11 vets. Here I was a vet, now an entrepreneurship professor. And so I had the idea to start an entrepreneurship boot camp program for veterans in the business school at Syracuse. And it turned out to be much more impactful than any of us thought in many different ways. And that program grew and expanded pretty quickly. And then we launched another program for caregivers and another program around business ownership specifically for women veterans. And at some point throughout all of this, I started looking around higher education. And honestly, I was very surprised that higher education as a community really had not purposely focused on veterans as a community and specifically the opportunities and challenges facing veterans as they transition out of the military into civilian life. And that it was that opportunity recognition moment, if you will, as an entrepreneurship professor, where I said, hey, Syracuse University, the institution that I happen to be at, has a long history serving veterans that goes all the way back to World War I. We have this contemporary footprint where we're focused on the post 9/11 generation of veterans related to business ownership. Bottom line is, I said, why not us? So I put a plan together and took it to the leadership at the university at the time and said, we should be the university that creates higher education's first academic institute focused on veterans and their families. And I was lucky that the leadership of the institution supported that vision. And only 6 years ago, we launched the Institute for Veterans and Military Families.
That's incredible. And one thing I was curious about before all this too was, you left the Air Force at that 14-year mark, and could you walk us through that? Because a lot of people are in this mindset of it's like 20, you stay into 20, you retire, and then you do something else. How did you approach your own decision to leave the military?
Yeah, as you can imagine, I've had to explain this many times. To include not too long ago to the Secretary of the Air Force when she asked me a similar question. Truth be told, I found I never planned to. I was an ROTC commissionee. I was going to do my 5 years and get out, and the Air Force kept opening the door to new opportunities for me. I love what I did, and I just went from one great assignment to another great assignment. All that said, all of a sudden I landed at an assignment, and I'm talking about my time teaching at the Air Force Academy, where I truly fell in love with what I was doing. I was excited to come to work every day. I loved being around the cadets, the students, and the responsibility and the opportunity associated with education. I just found very empowering and inspiring. And when my tour at the Air Force Academy was coming to an end, my Air Force career was an acquisition officer, a contracting officer, and my next assignment was going to be running an acquisition program in Crystal City, Virginia, and I just could not bring myself to reconcile the idea of and I don't know a different way to say it, but sort of hanging around for 6 more years to get to 20 and a retirement when I knew I had found something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so I made the hard decision, and it was a very hard decision, but made the hard decision to get out at 14 years and make the transition to civilian higher education.
That's great. I mean, I think it takes a lot of courage to do that, and you're in the rare minority. I mean, this is the 211th interview like this I've done, and it's so rare to find someone who, while on active duty, found exactly what they wanted to do when they got out, and that's incredible. I admire that you recognized that and then made the tough decision to follow that thread and see where it went, rather than play out something that you knew was not as much the direction you wanted to go.
Thanks. And it was not it was not without periods of regret. As I mentioned, describing the story of founding the Institute, I think it was also the case that when I transitioned from military higher education, my time at the Air Force Academy, to civilian higher education, not everything translated directly. And I did find myself, sometimes wondering, oh, what have I done? But I do think in retrospect, and I can see it now in retrospect, that my transition and subsequent work related to veterans in the military in the context of my role now in civilian higher education, I do think that was in some part about finding a way back. If you understand what I mean, it was an opportunity for me at that point in my life. My only personal and professional community was the military, and my work. At first launching those first couple programs around business ownership, and then today with the Institute, that is my way to stay connected to that community that I was part of for 14 years. And I think I found a good balance in the context of straddling the military community and the civilian higher education community.
And so many of the listeners of Beyond the Uniform are currently serving on active duty. What would you want them to know about IVMF and the type of work that you do?
Sure, that's a great question. I appreciate it because, so often, particularly as it's couched in a higher education context, when you hear the term institute, you instantly jump to sort of the nerdy research policy analysis. And, the Institute does all that, but I think what's most important, particularly in the context of those serving today, is to understand that the Institute at its core is about solving transition problems and opening transition pathways for service members and veterans and families more broadly. The Institute, as you mentioned in your intro, the Institute designs, develops, and delivers programs for service members, veterans, and their families that are designed to facilitate a successful transition. And the kind of programs I'm talking about are everything from the portfolio of business ownership programs that we run, but then also to credentialing, licensing, certification programs, working with private industry to build certifications linked to in-demand civilian jobs, working with private industry to recognize that, for example, one of the big opportunities in the veteran business ownership space is to plug veteran business owners into the supply chains of large companies. So therefore, we create a coalition of those large companies who work with us to create those kinds of opportunities for veterans. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, at its core, what we do is deliver actionable programming that benefits veterans and their families. And we do that in a way where everything we offer is free. And I think that's an important, right from the beginning, one of the founding principles, if you will, of the IVMF is that we were going to build an economic model for the Institute where we rely on our corporate partners, donors, et cetera, to design or to fund the design, development, and execution of our programs so that there's never a financial barrier for a service member or veteran to participate. So, to this day and today, everything we do programmatically is offered to veterans at no cost whatsoever. And I'll give you an example. One of our most popular programs is a program called the Veteran Career Transition Program, VCTP. That's a program that provides online skills training leading to, I think, 32 different civilian credentials, licenses, or certifications that are in demand in the labor market. One of those, for example, is the PMP, Program Management Professional Certification. That certification, if you transition with that certification to the civilian labor market, on average, it'll add about $15,000 to your civilian salary. That's how in demand that credential is. If you were to pursue a prep course and a training program to get that certification on the market, if you will, you'll pay somewhere between $7,500 and $10,000 for that program, and then the certification. You can do all of that through the IVMF with zero out of pocket. Matter of fact, if you go through the training and pass the practice test for the credential, we'll even pay for your fee to sit for the actual credentialing exam.
That's that's incredible. I think what I appreciate about that is the knowledge you're bringing to the table to be able to help someone in the military figure out and navigate amongst thousands of different potential programs to really find the one that's the one or the 32 that are most in demand, that are most likely to be financially rewarded in the marketplace. That in and of itself is tremendous value. But then the fact that you'll help people get these credentials, you'll do it in an efficient way and a cost-free way is really incredible.
Thanks. I think you just said something that is at the core of the transition challenge. Google, one of our partners, funded us to do a study a few years back. It's been about 2 years now, looking at the transition challenges associated with this generation of veterans. And I think we collected data on about 8,500 post 9/11 veteran families, and even to our surprise, when we asked questions about the transition from military to civilian life and what are the barriers, what are the challenges, the number one cited challenge was simply navigating all of the noise in the space. There are so many programs, there are so many organizations, and the extent to which individuals making that transition are really empowered to understand what works, what doesn't work, what fits with their envisioned future and their aspiration in terms of resources and how to access them. It really is a challenge, and it's one that that many families are not necessarily prepared for till all of a sudden it's right there in front of them on their plate.
I was at a conference held by Service to School, which is an incredible organization, and there was this panel I was on, and it was there was someone from the IVMF there, and there was several other resources, and one of the veterans or someone who was on active duty who was in the audience asked that question that you just articulated, which is like, how do we figure out how to get a hold of organizations like you? I really had this felt sense of the frustration of that person and many of the people in the room trying to figure out amidst all the noise how to really slice through to the organization that's literally designed to help them with something that they need help on. And I'm curious if you have any, that's a massive problem. I'm sure that's going to take a while to figure out. But do you have any advice for veterans about how to cut through that noise and how to find the right resource for them that's designed to help them as a veteran?
So that's another one of those questions that I get asked an awful lot. And even doing what I do, it's not an easy question to answer because there are several dimensions to that particular problem. One is simply the navigation dimension. How is it that you identify what resources are available to you and accessible to you? But then the second dimension is also, now that you found them, are they any good? And I think this is the second dimension is one of the evolving, something we're seeing evolve in the veterans space, much more so today than 5 or 6 years ago. It is fact that, in the years after 9/11, we saw a tremendous increase in the number of, for example, veteran-serving nonprofits in this country, upwards of, and many people have heard the numbers, upwards of 42,000 organizations out there that hung out a shingle and said, we're here to help veterans. And back, in that period after 9/11, it was very easy for folks to resource those nonprofits, for them to generate funding, et cetera. But there was never, in those early years, a focus on the efficacy of those interventions and the extent to which what a given nonprofit does, or even government programs at the time. There was such a scramble to improve the transition assistance program at VA and bring other resources online from the Department of Labor and other places. It's only been in the last few years where the space has evolved to a point where there's a lot of focus on, is this intervention any good? Is this going to work for the individual? And I think one of the ways that, and this is going to sound very rudimentary, but I would encourage a service member, a veteran that's in the process of planning transition and trying to navigate those resources, to approach it to approach the due diligence about the organizations that may be in a position to help them in the same way that they would think about and doing the research about buying a car or choosing a school. The more data and information you can collect, the better off you are. Folks that have experience with a given organization are some of the best resources. So if you're looking at whether it be a program of the IVMF or a particular college or university that you're thinking about that espouses a commitment to veterans, the first thing I would do is seek out individuals who have had experience with that program, that organization, that institution, and ask them to talk about their experiences, because that peer-to-peer feedback is invaluable, particularly because a lot of what you will find from those organizations and online, et cetera, is based on their view of the world. And it is true that sometimes an organization can assume the perspective of knowing what's best for an individual. And I personally believe that at the end of the day, my job is to empower someone else's aspiration, meaning that the universe, the world of choices is right there for them. And this is a soapbox I get on often as we talk about higher education and veterans. The idea of telling a veteran that here are the 10 things that you can go off and do or study or whatever it is because this is what you did in the military. I reject that out of hand. I think we're fortunate that these resources do exist, and really what it's incumbent upon us, both working in the community and then society more broadly, to position a service member, a veteran, in the context of their transition in a way that they can go out and realize any aspiration that they have for their post-service life.
I love that. I mean, so much of what you said resonates with me, and I love how you highlight the importance of talking to someone in a given industry or functional role or at a particular company and using those, coffee chats to get to know what it's like and collect some anecdotal data of is this something that I would like to do? Is this a career path that I would find appealing? And I really love, and I completely agree with you, this sense that that a veteran's future career is not predicated on what they've done in the military or their branch of service or their MOS or whatever it is. And one of the main motivations with this show is to be able to shine a spotlight on all of the different widely ranging career paths that veterans have pursued, and to realize, like, veterans can do anything. They can really pursue any career after their military service, and different careers may take different amount of energy and time and work to get there, but if they're willing to do that, there is probably some other veteran who has paved the way and has done that. And on the show, we've had Academy Award nominees and football players and, you name it, every crazy career path, authors, photographers, you name it, there's someone doing it. And I hope that listeners take encouragement from that to realize that they're not restricted to just a half dozen career paths. There's so many things open to them. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that the flip side of that, the downside, is that it can often be overwhelming then to narrow that down and to figure out which one to pursue. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, in addition to talking to people, any other way to narrow the playing field or get some sort of order from the chaos of unlimited possibilities once someone leaves the military.
Yeah, well, I think there's also something to be said for testing the market. It's something you said reminded me of another study that we did a little while back for some of our corporate partners. There's a lot of focus right now, particularly in industry focused on hiring vets on retention, and there have been multiple studies on the extent to which veterans who are, then take their first job out of the military, the extent to which they are retained at those companies over a period of time. And truth be told, the retention numbers aren't great. They're about 54% of folks out of the military that take that first job don't last for a year in that first job. Now, when I say that's not great, that's not necessarily great from the perspective of the employer. But the other side of that coin is, if you dig into the cause of the low retention, most of it is about testing the marketplace. It's about taking a job, living an experience, and realizing, what, financial service isn't what I thought it was. This isn't what I want to do. I'm going to pivot and pursue a different path, or retail, or insurance, or whatever it is. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's actually a very positive step. And we see the same thing in business ownership and veterans. I often have veterans who tell me, or come through our programs and want to start a business. They want to start a coffee shop, for a simple example. The first thing I'll say is, well, you ever work in a coffee shop? Before you open a coffee shop, go work in one for 6 months. See if you really want to own a coffee shop. And I think that's that sort of testing the market. Often folks are in a hurry, and I get that. You've had this military career and you've made the decision to transition, and you want to get on with it. But at the same time, as you rightfully highlighted, there are so many options. Take your time and pick the right one. Really understand the path that you're going down, and often that can be done, in a way where you explore a few different career paths before you settle on the one that's going to be your long-term future.
That's great. I'm reminded when you're saying that, I read recently the biography of the Wright brothers, and one of the things that stuck with me, and one of the things that we reference a lot at the startup where I work, is that one of the reasons why the Wright brothers succeeded where so many other well-funded organizations failed was at the time, like the cost of each flight experiment was something around $150,000. So you had these organizations with a ton of money plowing lots of money in to try to achieve flight. And the Wright brothers, took a different path, and above their bike shop, they created what was the first wind tunnel and did hundreds and hundreds of tests where the effective cost of each test was about 50 cents. And that's one of the reasons people think that they succeeded was their cost of experiment was so exceptionally low that they could run so many more experiments. And so when you're talking about this, that's the example that jumps into my mind is like, wow, how can veterans have as many low-cost experiments as possible? How can they have conversations or work in the coffee shop for a month prior to sinking $20,000 of savings into starting a coffee shop? Like, how can you get data as quickly and efficiently as possible to better inform your next step? And it goes back to that whole thought of like low retention of, I think when I left the military, I viewed it as, I went on submarines, I'm going to do this for 5 years, I'm committed to this. And it was a little bit of a shock to realize, like, no, you need to learn, and if you're in a job and you're not liking it, you should switch jobs. It's advantageous for you, but also for the employer. That if you're not thriving there, you should be willing to drop, pull up anchor and move on quickly rather than slog it out for 5 years. There's not that sense of loyalty, I think, that some people might go into it feeling.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I love the Wright brothers example. I may. I'll give you credit somewhere on my syllabus, but I may steal that for, one of my entrepreneurship classes because that's exactly right. I mean, it really is a great example of, whether you're talking about a career or business ownership, test and pivot. That opportunity is there, and it will serve you well over time to become an informed consumer. I mean, that's sort of the phrase I use around the office all the time, that our job is to help service members, veterans, become informed consumers about the world of possibilities that are in front of them so that they make smart and informed choices.
And I'm aware, a lot of listeners and just a lot of people in the military in general are interested in entrepreneurship. And I realize you have taught about entrepreneurship, you have been an entrepreneur in starting the IVMF and many other organizations. You have been the founder of Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans with Disabilities. I'm just curious if you have any other advice or thoughts for people who may be on active duty right now, but that aspire to start their own company one day.
Sure. I mean, a lot of what we talk about, or that we've talked about so far in our conversation, is very relevant. And the idea of being an informed consumer, the idea of really doing your due diligence. But then, I may sound like a hypocrite when I talk about due diligence on one hand, but on the other hand, I will say that the biggest barrier that we have seen. I've been teaching vets entrepreneurship for the better part of 10 years. And, my Ph.D. is in entrepreneurship. It's what I study as an academic. And whether we're talking about vets or others, biggest barriers is simply fear. The idea of taking action to launch a venture, the ability to overcome that fear. There's a quote that I use a lot it's actually from Martin Luther King. And the quote is take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. And I use that when I talk about entrepreneurship all the time because, I think one of the military prepares individuals uniquely to succeed as entrepreneurs in ways they don't understand. A classic academic definition of entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity in the face of inherently constrained resources. And, particularly when I talk to young soldiers and Marines and I say, hey, do you think your experience in the military can be framed as the pursuit of opportunity in the face of constrained resources? And, absolutely, that's what it was. And, the military is a great training ground for entrepreneurs. That said, the military also trains people to be planners. And, often when we see folks with an aspiration to start a business that just never gets off the ground, when you talk to them, they're always planning. Well, I need to do market research. I need to get, more relationships on board. I need to better understand the product or the technology or the service. And at some point, you just need to pull the trigger and take entrepreneurial action. And when that doesn't happen, what's most often behind it is fear. And that is not an unreasonable thing. I'm not saying that it is not unreasonable to have fear associated with starting a business. You should be afraid. It's healthy. All that said, I do think that one of the things that holds many people back is that fear. And if you do it right and you do it in a way where you're not trying to go from 0 to 100 inside of 3 months, but take small actionable steps with regard to sort of incrementally growing the business that you envision for yourself, you can launch a business in a way that is not as that doesn't confer as much risk as you would think. So I think at the end of the day, it really is about do the homework, build the networks, get the align the resources that you might need, but then ultimately just go out there and do it.
I appreciate how you point out how well suited military veterans are to entrepreneurship. I completely agree. And I benefited extremely from my time at Stanford Business School and the network and the teachings. But I feel like in my own journey of entrepreneurship, so much of what I've been doing has been predicated on what I learned at the Naval Academy and in my military service. And a lot of this just ability to put your head down and block and tackle and work through unbelievable obstacles. And I love that you point out the flip side of that, of the potential downside of over planning and that critical role that fear does play in preventing people from diving in. And it's that overused phrase that you eat an elephant one bite at a time. It's the same thing of just realizing that the propensity to overplan, and I love how you'd said that, of just taking that first step in faith and taking small actionable steps and just continuously doing that. There's that great book on that called The Slight Edge, and the basic principle is just choosing principles that are sound and that lead to good things, and then just applying it in tiny increments every single day relentlessly. And I think that that's what makes me optimistic about veteran entrepreneurs. Is I think that the relentlessly part is something veterans can do well at. They can really, once they have a mission, they can go and achieve it. And it just so happens that the mission might be to do very tiny things every single day repeatedly. And I hope that gives people some sort of confidence listening to that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. One of these days when I actually have some spare time, I'm going to write a book about this. But I am convinced, and sometimes I have to swallow hard to say this, but some of my most successful veteran entrepreneurs that have been through our programs, it's interesting. They're young enlisted Marines, and it's taken me quite a while to get my head around why that is. But I think at the end of the day, it is this idea of persistence that you just described. They don't know any better, meaning that they don't know that this is supposed to be this hard and they just persist, and they're resilient through all of the pain. And some of those young women and young men that I'm describing have gone on to build remarkable businesses. The kinds of stories that if I were to tell one of my entrepreneurship professor colleagues, they would think that I'm just making it up. But young enlisted Marines today running businesses doing $20 and $30 million in revenue a year. They're crazy stories, but I think there is something to this idea of, here's the objective. I don't have all the resources I need, but I know that I can make do with what I have, and where I need help, I'll ask for help, and I'm just going to go do it. It is remarkable, the extent to which I think military service does prepare individuals for success as business owners.
And the next question I had is kind of two-part, but it's if someone listening is on, let's say they're on active duty and they want to take advantage of the resources that the IVMF has to offer, what are kind of next steps for them? And then conversely, maybe someone listening has been out of the military for a long time and they really are energized by what you're describing. How could they support the IVMF?
Well, so I'll answer those two questions the same way, and that is the extent to which we're able to keep doing what we're doing is a function of the extent to which we can show our partners, the people that fund us, that we're creating value. And what I mean when I describe that is the best thing that folks getting out of the military can do is take advantage of our programs. Everything we do is pretty well described on the website, and you can connect with us through our social media platforms, et cetera. But when people ask me how they can help or how they can get involved, I usually say the same thing, and that is, take advantage of something that we have to offer, and then go out and realize whatever your transition dream is. We benefit by your success, and the extent to which we can turn around and point to you or point to you or point to you and say, we played some small part in helping them get that job, start that business. That's enough for us. And that not only keeps us going professionally from the perspective of motivated and committed and passionate about the work we do, but it also gives us a story to take to the folks that provide the resources we need to do our work and say, look, we're having an impact. And so I guess I would answer whether it's a service member getting out now or somebody who's been out for a long time. And I will say we have an amazing amount of folks taking advantage of our programs that have been out of the military, 10, 15, in some cases 20 years, who are at a point in their career where they're looking to do something different. We describe transition not as something that happens simply at a moment in time when you take the uniform off, but it's that entire post-service life course. And the programs that we have available, the resources, they are really focused on transition as something that happens over time throughout your life after military service. So we make our programs and resources available to any veteran, regardless of service area, regardless of how long out of the military. So, I guess I would answer your question the same way. Take advantage of what we do, and go out and realize whatever aspiration that you have for yourself.
And I know that the National Veterans Resource Center is being built right now on campus at Syracuse University. What's ahead for the campus? What's in store for you and your work there?
Yeah, it really is exciting. So, as you mentioned, we broke ground in January on a $63 million construction project, a building we're calling the National Veterans Resource Center. It's an entirely private sector project. It is the home or the future home of the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, but it's also conceived to be a national center of excellence in higher education, focused on veterans and their families. The idea that we can leverage the facility and the convening space there to hold national conferences, academic symposiums, et cetera, focused on the social, economic, wellness concerns of veterans and their families. It's very exciting. There will not be another facility like it in all of higher education, and it really is a testament beyond the Institute for Veterans and Military Families. Syracuse University has a remarkable history in service to veterans. One that honestly I didn't know when I arrived at SU in 2006. But truth be told, up until the middle of World War II, SU was a small regional liberal arts college that never had an enrollment more than about 4,100 students. But our chancellor at the time, a gentleman named William Tully, was asked by President Roosevelt to work with another group, a larger group of university leaders, to figure out what to do with 12 million returning World War II veterans. And that group came up with the GI Bill. And what our chancellor did quite uniquely was he wrote in 1945 a one-page letter that I have hanging on my wall in my office. And in military format, it said, "From Syracuse University to returning war veterans, subject to your future." And in that one-page letter, he invited admission to the university to any returning World War II veteran that wanted a college degree, even if you did not have a high school degree. And we went from an enrollment in 1945, about 4,100 students, to within 2 years, just over 17,000 students. And that entire delta were returning World War II veterans. And, really what the institution has committed to today is to honor that legacy by being a national example in higher education for how we engage and support this generation and future generations of veterans. So, today we have just over 1,500 military-connected students enrolled at Syracuse. Those are our student veterans and our active duty military. And for context, 6 years ago, that number was less than 200. And there's a commitment across the entire institution to focus on this community, and I think the National Veterans Resource Center is the physical manifestation of that commitment.
Well, I know we have barely scratched the surface, and I'm working with your team to get other people from IVMF on to share the tremendous body of research that you've put together. I always like to end with an open-ended question, which is we covered a lot of ground today, but I'm sure there's things we didn't talk about, and I'm just kind of would love to make it open-ended. If there's anything we didn't talk about that you'd like to share with listeners, I wanted to make space for that.
Oh, that's a dangerous thing to toss at me. I have lots of soapboxes in this space that I can jump on. But I will tell you, if I have one thing that I particularly over the last 4 or 5 years have become really passionate about, it's veterans in higher education. I think as we've watched, for example, how the private sector, in the face of what was 4 or 5 years ago, high rates of unemployment among veterans, and the private sector stepped up in ways that really were unprecedented historically to create coalitions of companies hiring veterans and veterans hiring initiatives across Fortune 500 companies. One of the things that's really bothered me about my own industry is that you haven't seen that same kind of commitment among traditional colleges and universities. If you look at the post 9/11 GI Bill, now called the Forever GI Bill, it's the most generous educational entitlement or benefit that's been available to veterans since World War II. But truth be told, if you look at, take any listing, take the U.S. News and World Report, top 150 universities, for example, in the country, and look at the number of post 9/11 veterans that they've admitted, particularly at the undergraduate level, at any time over the last 10 years. Many of those institutions, you could count the number of veterans attending on one hand at the undergraduate level. And I think that's that's, I use a strong word. I think that's shameful. And one of the things that I hope in the future is that, the Syracuse of the world, the Columbias of the world who are doing really good work in this space, that other universities come to the table and provide alternatives for service members and veterans with regard to the opportunity to pursue or make progress towards a college degree in a way that will set themselves up for long-term success. If you look at, I've read everything I could read, for example, on the post-World War II period in this country, and one of the great benefits of the original GI Bill was the opportunity to leverage colleges and universities as ways to re-socialize and integrate veterans into society, because college campuses they're an awful lot like the military. We have songs and colors and symbols and artifacts, and and as I said today, many historians will cite that as the greatest benefit, even beyond the money of the original GI Bill. That's not happening today, and I think that's a shame. That so many service members and veterans are for one reason or another in a position where the doors to traditional higher education have been closed to them. And I think as a society, if we're to realize the benefit of the GI Bill, we have to find a way to open those doors. So, that's one of my current soapboxes, and there's much more I could say. We don't have the time, but I would encourage folks to think about the tremendous opportunity that is afforded with the educational benefit that they have at transition, and to make the most of that benefit.
Well, Mike, this has been awesome. I appreciate all the work that you do, all the research you're doing, and the 35,000 plus military veterans and their families that you have helped. For listeners, in the show notes at beyondtheuniform.io, I'll have a link to all the resources like the Veteran Career Transitions Program and other things we discussed. Mike, thanks so much for your time today.
Hey, I was thrilled to do it. I enjoyed the conversation.
Surface.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Uniform. There are over 200 free episodes at beyondtheuniform.io. They're classified by the industry of focus, the functional role the person plays, and more. Beyond the Uniform is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Justin Asiri. Our Director of Outreach, responsible for sponsorship and guest episodes, is Steve Bain. Our editor, responsible for the show notes and text transcripts for all episodes, is Kathleen Dillon. Our data analytics and insights advisor is Andrew Woolridge. If you are enjoying Beyond the Uniform, you can help us out by telling your veterans and friends in the military about this free resource. There is more information on the website about how you can sponsor an episode or donate to our program to help us grow the work that we're doing. Be sure to check out the coaching section of beyondtheuniform.io, where you can be paired with professional, subsidized coaches to help you figure out your next career move. You can sign up for our newsletter to be up to date on the latest happenings at Beyond the Uniform. And in each show notes section, there is a link to audible.com, which is providing a free audiobook of your choice to Beyond the Uniform listeners. You get a free book of your choosing, and Beyond the Uniform gets $15 to subsidize the cost of the show, regardless of whether you continue with audible.com or not. Check that out and more in the show notes for this episode. Keep the feedback coming. Let me know what resources would help you in your career, and we'll do our best to make that happen. Take care, be safe, and I'll be back next week with more interviews with military veterans about their civilian career.